Something happened last night that forced your soulmate to reconsider the story they had been telling themselves about you for a very long time. My beloved child. It began with a phone call they almost ignored. Their phone lit up on the kitchen counter a little after 9. They had been standing there alone, reheating coffee they had forgotten to finish hours earlier, when a familiar name appeared across the screen. For several seconds, they simply stared at it. The person calling was someone they had not spoken to properly in months. Someone who had been there during the final weeks before you walked away. Someone your soulmate had quietly associated with the worst chapter of your connection. Their first instinct was not to answer. They almost let the call disappear. But something made them reach for the phone. And before that conversation ended, your soulmate would hear one sentence that made them sit down, go completely silent, and question almost everything they believed about the day you left. The person on the other end did not begin dramatically. There was no confession at first. Just an awkward greeting. A few ordinary questions. How have you been? How's work? Are you still living in the same place? Your soulmate answered cautiously, sensing there was another reason for the call. Then the voice became quieter. There's something I should have told you a long time ago. Your soulmate stopped moving. The microwave beeped behind them. They did not turn around. What are you talking about? Another pause. And then came the sentence that changed everything. They didn't leave because they stopped loving you. Your soulmate felt their stomach tighten. Because for months, maybe longer, that was exactly what they had believed. That you became tired of them. That you emotionally detached first. That when you walked away, you had already made peace with losing them. They had built an entire explanation around your silence. Whenever memories returned, they told themselves the same thing. If you had really cared, you would have stayed. If the connection had mattered enough, you would have fought harder. If they had been important to you, you would not have become so distant. That story hurt. But eventually it became familiar. Familiar pain can sometimes feel safer than an unfamiliar truth. And your soulmate had learned how to live inside that version. Until last night. What do you mean? They asked. The person on the phone hesitated. I mean, you never knew the whole story. That answer irritated your soulmate more than they expected. Because suddenly all the old questions were alive again. The unanswered messages. The short conversations. The way you stopped explaining yourself near the end. The day you said you were exhausted and they assumed you meant exhausted with them. The last serious conversation between you, when you sat quietly longer than usual before saying, I can't keep doing this. Your soulmate had remembered that sentence hundreds of times. But now, for the first time, they wondered whether they had remembered its meaning correctly. Because you had never said, I don't love you. You had never said, there's someone else. You had never even said, I want a life without you. You had said, I can't keep doing this. At the time, your soulmate heard rejection. Last night, they began to hear exhaustion. The person on the phone continued. You were going through things back then. More than you admitted. And every time you shut down, they tried to figure out what they had done wrong. Your soulmate looked toward the dark kitchen window. Their reflection stared back at them. You're saying this was my fault? No, the voice replied. I'm saying they kept trying to reach you, and eventually they stopped because every attempt seemed to hurt them more. Your soulmate said nothing. The coffee behind them had gone cold again. And suddenly a memory returned. One they had not thought about in a long time. It was late. You had asked them a simple question. Are you okay? They had answered, I'm fine. You asked again. They became defensive. Then irritated. Then distant. And finally you said, very softly, you know you don't have to keep pushing me away every time something scares you. Your soulmate remembered how quickly they had dismissed that sentence. They had told you that you were overthinking everything. That not every quiet moment was about the relationship. That you needed to stop taking things personally. At the time, they believed they were defending themselves. Now they wondered whether you had been trying to tell them something much bigger. The phone conversation lasted nearly 40 minutes. And with every few minutes, another piece of the past shifted. Your soulmate learned that shortly before you walked away, you had spoken privately with the person now calling them. You had not insulted your soulmate. You had not said you wanted revenge. You had not said you were looking for someone new. You had said something much harder to hear. I love them, but I don't recognize myself anymore. When your soulmate heard those words, they closed their eyes. Because there it was. The part they had never understood. You did not leave because you felt nothing. You left because staying in the same pattern was slowly costing you too much. But there was still something the caller had not explained. And your soulmate could hear it in their hesitation. Why are you telling me this now? Silence. Then. Because I think I made it worse. Your soulmate straightened. What did you do? The person breathed out slowly. And that was when the conversation moved from painful to devastating. During the weeks before the separation, your soulmate had confided in this person. They had admitted feeling uncertain. Afraid. Overwhelmed. They had said they did not know whether they were capable of giving you what you needed. But instead of encouraging an honest conversation between the two of you, this person had interpreted the situation through their own fears. They told your soulmate to protect themselves. To become less available. To stop chasing. To make you prove how much you cared. At the same time, when you privately admitted how exhausted you were becoming, this same person told you something different. They need space. Stop pushing. If they really want you, they'll come back. Two people who were already frightened were being encouraged to become even quieter. Neither of you knew the advice being given to the other. And little by little, silence began replacing communication. Your soulmate leaned forward, one hand covering their face. You told them to back away? Yes. And you told me to do the same thing? Another pause. Yes. The anger came quickly. Not loud anger. The quieter kind. The kind that makes someone replay years in seconds. Why? The answer was uncomfortable. Because I thought I was helping. Your soulmate almost laughed, but nothing about the moment was funny. The caller continued. I thought the relationship had become unhealthy for both of you. I thought distance would force clarity. I didn't realize you were both going to interpret that distance as rejection. And there it was. The midpoint of the truth. Your soulmate had spent all this time believing you withdrew because you stopped caring. But you had been withdrawing because you believed they wanted distance. And they had become colder because they believed your withdrawal proved you no longer wanted them. Two people were reacting to the same silence. And both thought the other had created it. But even that did not absolve your soulmate. They understood that immediately. Because advice may have influenced them. Fear may have confused them. Someone else may have misunderstood the situation. But your soulmate still made choices. They chose not to ask you what was happening. They chose pride when vulnerability would have been more honest. They noticed your pain and sometimes responded with defensiveness instead of curiosity. They watched you become quieter and convinced themselves that acting indifferent would protect them. And perhaps most painfully, when you finally walked away, they never asked the question they had been too afraid to hear answered. Did I make you feel alone while you were still standing beside me? That question followed them after the call ended. They remained at the kitchen table long after the screen went dark. The house was completely quiet. They opened your old message thread. They had not done that in months. Their thumb moved slowly through conversations that once seemed ordinary. A photo you had sent. A joke they had forgotten. A plan that never happened. Then they reached the final weeks. And something became painfully obvious. Your messages had changed gradually. Not suddenly. At first, you were still trying. Can we talk tonight? Did I do something? I feel like you've been somewhere else lately. Please just tell me what's happening. Then your messages became shorter. Okay. No worries. I understand. And finally, take care of yourself. Your soulmate stared at that sentence for a long time. Because they remembered reading it back then and thinking you sounded cold. Now it sounded different. It sounded like someone who had stopped asking for answers because asking had become humiliating. Then they saw a message they had forgotten completely. You had sent it at 11:47 one night. I'm not asking you to fix everything. I just need to know I'm not carrying this alone. Your soulmate read it once. Then again. And on the third time, they put the phone down. Because they finally understood something they had resisted for far too long. You did not need perfection from them. You needed participation. You needed honesty. You needed them to stop disappearing emotionally whenever life became difficult. You needed a relationship in which problems could be spoken about before they became walls. And when they could not give you that, you eventually did the one thing they never expected. You chose yourself. That realization hurt their pride. But it also created respect. Because now they could see that walking away had not been punishment. It had been a boundary. You were not trying to make them chase you. You were trying to stop abandoning yourself. And that is where the truth became even more uncomfortable. Because your soulmate had spent a long time secretly waiting for you to make the first move. They told themselves you were the one who left, so you should be the one to return. They told themselves they had already been hurt enough. They convinced themselves that reaching out would make them look weak. But last night, Sitting alone with an old conversation glowing in their hands, they realized how unfair that expectation had been. If they wanted another chance to speak to you, they could not ask you to repair the damage they helped create. They had to take responsibility. Not just for missing you. Missing someone is easy. They had to take responsibility for how they behaved when they had you. That distinction changed everything. Around midnight, they began typing. Your name appeared at the top of the screen. The first message was too emotional. They deleted it. The second tried too hard to explain the past. Deleted again. The third began with, I heard something tonight. They stared at it for several minutes. Then erased that too. Because suddenly they understood that blaming the phone call, the friend, the misunderstanding, or the timing would still be another form of avoidance. Yes, someone had influenced the situation. Yes, information had been incomplete. But your soulmate knew that the most important truth was not what another person had done. It was what they themselves had failed to do. So they started again. This time, slower. I owe you an apology. They stopped. Their hands were trembling slightly. Not because those words were dramatic. Because they were accurate. They continued. I spent a long time believing you walked away because you stopped caring. Tonight I learned things I didn't know. But I also realized something harder. I made you carry uncertainty I should have helped you carry. I expected you to understand feelings I refused to communicate. They read it. Then added another line. You asked me for honesty, and too often I gave you silence. That was the line that broke something open inside them. Because now the story was no longer about whether you still loved each other. It was about whether they had become capable of loving differently. They stood and walked to the window. Outside, the street was almost empty. One car passed. Then another. Their phone remained on the table behind them with the unfinished message waiting. For a few minutes, they considered deleting everything. The old instinct returned. Avoid the discomfort. Wait another day. Maybe another week. Maybe convince yourself the moment has passed. But then they remembered something else you once told them. Not during an argument. During one of the good days. You were sitting together in the car after dinner, neither of you ready to go inside. You had said, I don't need you to always know what to say. I just need you to not disappear when it matters. They had smiled back then. Maybe even promised they understood. Last night, they finally did. So they returned to the table. They finished the message. But before sending it, they added something that proved their understanding had changed. I'm not sending this to pressure you into coming back. You don't owe me another chance. You don't owe me an answer tonight. I just don't want my pride to leave you carrying a version of the past where you were blamed for protecting yourself. Then came the truth they had avoided admitting for months. I still care about you. I probably never stopped. But I understand now that caring about you does not give me the right to ask you to trust me again. If trust is ever rebuilt, I would have to earn it. Your soulmate stared at the message. Everything in them wanted certainty. A guarantee that you would answer. A guarantee that you still felt something. A guarantee that admitting the truth would bring you back. But relationships do not work that way. And for perhaps the first time, they accepted that love without control is still love. They could tell the truth without demanding the outcome. They could apologize without making forgiveness your responsibility. They could change without using that change as a bargaining chip. At 12:18, they pressed send. Then they immediately put the phone face down. For the next several minutes, they did not touch it. Their heart was beating too quickly. They walked into the kitchen, rinsed the cold coffee from the mug, and stood at the sink longer than necessary. When they finally returned, the phone screen was still dark. And strangely, that silence did not feel the same anymore. Because this time, they were not hiding inside it. They had finally spoken. Whether you answer immediately, later, or not at all is not the point of what changed inside them. The deeper change is that your soulmate finally understands why you walked away. You were not asking to be worshipped. You were asking to be met. You were not demanding that they never struggle. You were asking them to stop making you guess whether you were still important whenever they struggled. You did not leave because your heart suddenly became empty. You left because love had begun asking you to betray your own emotional boundaries. And now your soulmate sees the difference. They also understand something they could not understand before. You walking away may have been the first completely honest thing that happened between the two of you in a long time. It forced the truth into a place where avoidance could no longer hide it. That does not erase the hurt. It does not rewrite the past. And it does not guarantee that two people who once loved each other should automatically try again. Some relationships are repaired. Some become lessons. Some people reconnect after real change. Others finally find peace by understanding what happened and choosing different paths. Your soulmate knows that now. And if there is ever another conversation between you, they no longer want it to begin with excuses. They want it to begin with accountability. They want to tell you that they were afraid. That pride made them quieter than they should have been. That they mistook emotional distance for protection. That they let someone else's interpretation influence a relationship that should have been discussed directly between the two people living inside it. Most importantly, they want to admit that by the time you walked away, you had probably already tried to reach them more times than they were willing to acknowledge. That is the truth. Not that you abandoned them. Not that they never mattered to you. Not that love disappeared overnight. The truth is that you reached a point where love alone could no longer justify confusion. And when you chose peace, they misunderstood your boundary as rejection. Now they know better. For the first time, they are not asking, "Why did you leave me?" They are asking a much more difficult question. What was happening inside you that I refused to see? And somewhere inside that question is the possibility of something healthier than the relationship you once had. Maybe it becomes a conversation. Maybe an apology. Maybe closure. Maybe, after enough honesty and enough change, something new. But whatever happens next, it cannot be built on the old silence. Your soulmate finally understands that. The message has been sent. The truth has been admitted. And now, instead of expecting you to rescue the connection, they are beginning to understand what they should have understood before you ever had to walk away. If someone wants a place in your life, love cannot only exist inside their feelings. Eventually, it has to become honesty. It has to become consistency. It has to become accountability. It has to become action. And this time, they know the difference.